Hi everyone, my name's KP. I'm part of the SIFPAC support team. Welcome to day one of the 2025 Supplier Development Summit, hosted by the Good Food Purchasing Initiative Team, GFPI for short. Together with our partners, we are working to make Chicagoland's food system more equitable and transparent and centered on food that is local, sustainable, fair, humane, and nutritious. This means shifting how institutions buy food through the Good Food Purchasing Program, while also uplifting suppliers with resources and gatherings like this summit that you're attending. Thank you for joining the Assessing Institutional Market Opportunities session featuring Amanda Chu, Procurement Director at Real Food Challenge.
It's KP. Welcome everybody. I am gonna jump right in and get started by sharing my screen. I hope that some of you are able to be in person tomorrow. Okay, great. Um, but in the meantime, this virtual setting will have to do. Cool. So yes, like KP said, I'm the procurement director at Real Food Challenge. I've been with our org for 2 years now. And before that, so I should say I'm also currently the board president of a farmers co-op in Northeast Wisconsin. And so I've been serving on that board and supporting operations and supporting planned growth of that co-op for the last 4 years. But also before I joined the RFC team, I had started a food policy council. I'd served in local office. I worked in higher ed. So I'm really excited to talk about like different wholesale channels and think through with all of you like how do we plan for growth? Should we? Does it make sense? If so, like where do we start with breaking into them? How do we hold those relationships? What kind of conversations do we have about it? And so I want the goal of our time together today is to help get everybody a little bit more information and help everybody find a little more clarity on how you want to keep exploring wholesale markets or do the next tangible thing that's going to move you in that direction. So that was a little bit about me. I'm right now calling in from Northeast Wisconsin, so the traditional lands of the Menominee and Potawatomi and now the Haudenosaunee. And so I'm so glad to be here. My family and I are full-time on the road, so we travel the country and I meet a lot of different institutional buyers while we're on the road. At Real Food Challenge, we're super focused on bringing values-based procurement into higher ed spaces. So some of my perspective in this session is going to be geared around that. But again, like my experience with our farmers co-op and as a farm owner in the past, I have had experience with like just non-institutional wholesale markets, and we'll talk a little bit what that looks like too. So Real Food Challenge, we're a food justice nonprofit focused on higher ed, and we go about bringing values-based purchasing to those spaces kind of in two ways. We work with students and help them build their voice and their refine their desire, their collective voice on a campus so that they can be the best accountability partners and motivators in their institutional spaces to demand real food on campus. The other way we go about this, thanks everyone for dropping where you're from. The other way we go about this is by doing food spend assessment at the institution, much like GFPP, but a little more simplified. And then we also, in my job, I get to work with growers and connect them kind of farm to college and maybe support some of the chefs and the menu design and other pieces like that so that we can be bringing values-based producers like y'all into those institutional spaces. Okay, I said too much about me. I love seeing kind of where folks are trickling in from. I'm just gonna take a look here. Welcome, welcome. So yes, please drop in where you're from, the name of your organization or business. If you'd like, just for some bonus, yes, I see you, mac and cheese. We love this. Um, all right. Conky, of course, and it's the season for it. Thanks, everyone. It is cozy food season. Cozy and connected. That's how I hope we're feeling today as we're like working through all this great content. And also just focusing around like the things that center us, like that meal that helps us feel cozy and connected, that makes us feel centered and grounded. Because when we're like thinking about how we fit into these wholesale channels, it can pretty quickly start to feel complicated and a little overwhelming. So my goal for today is to make sure I love all these. We should start a recipe book just in this chat thread. Um, is to give everybody enough information that's meaningful to y'all, and to not like give you so much that you're feeling overwhelmed. So I'm going to be teetering on that balance point. To that, please, KP's helping me, Sean's helping me keep an eye on the chat. So I'm going to work through our content and simultaneously be trying to check on things that come up. So please, if things are coming up for you, you've got a story to tell, you've got a question to ask, please drop it in the chat and we'll just work through it all like real time. Oh, this is great. I love seeing where y'all are coming from. Those cozy meals. Yeah. And get to know a little bit about your work. So other housekeeping things, please like take care of your needs. It's hard to be sitting online for an hour and a half straight, like really engaged. So please do what you gotta do to be well and feel good. I'm curious of the folks here, who please drop in the chat. If you're currently selling in wholesale markets, you're just like curious about them and you're like taking some initial steps to explore, or if you're preparing, like you have a plan to be getting into wholesale markets, or if you're in a position where you're doing work like me and supporting others who are navigating these market channels. I would have like made a cute poll for y'all, but I didn't figure that out yet. So I'd love to see your answers, your responses in the chat. Soups and gathering fires. We love that. Seems like we've got some folks in the room who are supporting others navigating. So yep, totally. Working on that buyer readiness. That's the other side of the coin, right? We need allies in that space. Cool. Seriously, looking to seriously prepare. Perfect. Here to learn. Awesome. Great. Well, thanks. I'll keep keep your responses trickling in. You're thinking about them maybe, or you're typing them right now. I was just so curious because I want to make sure that we are talking about things that are meaningful to folks in the room. So our welcome and framing, I want to get into what wholesale buyers look like because it's a really big term. And so we'll spend a little bit of time kind of breaking it down, categorizing the types of buyers in this big wholesale buyer tent. And then I would like to spend the bulk of the time on a self-assessment activity that helps us each understand how ready we may or may not be to start stepping into those markets. And then like planning some infrastructure around what it would take to scale up and seeing what that looks like, feels like by the dollar amount. So we'll spend some time on that. Um, Sourcing from y'all, we've got some collaborative success stories to tell, but I'm sure there are other success stories in this room and would love to hear those from y'all. Um, and then we'll get into the action planning piece. And so we've got a tool to share with y'all for you to make your own. And so we'll be spending some time in that tool a couple different times during this workshop. And we'll circle up and close together and hear how, like, what your top takeaway would be from the session today. Oh, thanks, Olivia. I see that. See you in the chat. So there could be folks in the room who currently have direct to consumer sales. Like sometimes we think about that as your business having its own like retail sales, so retail and wholesale. Um, Sometimes when that's the starting place for the business model for folks, it makes it a nice point to compare what expanding into wholesale looks like. So I'm not quite sure who's currently doing direct to consumer or DTC sales in this room. Um, and so my intention is not to spend a ton of time in this table, but just to mention, just to like help draw some useful comparisons overall. So if from direct retail to wholesale channels, there's a difference in sales volume. There might be a difference in the way that we're marketing and what kind of sales effort we have to put into it. There's usually a difference on pricing and margins. Like you can get a much higher, you can apply your own markup and have a lot more control over your margins when it's you doing those direct sales versus when you're getting into the wholesale channel. There's It could be that your direct to consumer sales maybe have a little less predictability to them. And if you build to the point, for sure, Carla, we'll make sure to drop the deck to y'all. When we are like getting established into wholesale markets, we can do more planned forecasting. And relationship building, it's a lot more direct. When it's direct, it's a lot more one-on-one. Versus when we're in wholesale channels, maybe there's one or two points of contact to move a lot more volume. Versus, if you've got a CSA program, for example, you're nurturing and you're tending to each individual customer because they're a part of your community. The logistics look different, and of course, brand visibility might be less important in wholesale channels, and we'll look at why. So a little bit of time here on the types of wholesale buyers. There are different ways to categorize them. I think this way is easy for the way that my brain works and the things that I've seen in the field. And so I hope that it makes sense for y'all too. So we've got wholesale buyers, and some of them could be retailers like grocery stores who are taking your product, putting it on their shelf and selling it to their clientele. Food service operators at like restaurants, hotels, catering companies, and then institutional sales here. There's for sure food service component, but on the whole, institutions, we can think of farm to school, like in K-12 systems, universities, corrections, these sorts of public institutions. Another type of wholesale buyer is a food manufacturer. So that's looking to take raw ingredients and transform it into another value added product. So maybe taking your produce and processing it and flash freezing it and turning it into something under their own brand. And then lastly, this kind of catch all these other wholesalers or distributors, co-ops, it could be a food hub too. And so let's take a little bit of time on each of those in a sec. So this is very generalized, but all of these types of wholesale buyers are thinking and basing their purchasing in some to whatever degree um, around the scale, consistency, and price of the products that they're sourcing. The size and the packaging could be very, very important, or it could be a little less important, but it's something that chefs and buyers are thinking about. And then this whole big, scary kind of like compliance box. So um, is the supplier onboarded into our system? So for at the institutional level, like compliance becomes a really big deal. So at public institutions, there are whole procurement teams, and there's procurement policy and procurement protocol. And so now all of a sudden, to be compliant as a supplier or a vendor to these institutions, it means that you have to check a lot more boxes. Those institutional market channels can be a lot bigger if you're thinking about how big the food budgets are for those size of public institutions, but also are like more hoops to jump through. So we'll try to walk through later today, like how do we balance that return on the investments that we have to put in to make sure that we're compliant with institutions or other wholesale buyers. So these are the types of questions, kind of like in each of these areas, that buyers and chefs might be asking themselves. So under scale consistency, so can I get enough of this often enough at a price that fits in my budget? Like that's probably the first question they're asking themselves. Like, how does this fit into our menus? And this like, does it fit in my budget? Can I get enough when I need it? Like these are the top two questions that folks are probably asking themselves initially. If you have an availability sheet, if you have maybe a bit of a menu guide on how some of your specialty products could fit into a menu flow, those are things that could be helpful. And why I offer up this snapshot of what buyers in wholesale markets are thinking about is because that helps us as the value added folks to put some strategy and planning around how we're going to meet these concerns for the chefs, for example, and the other like compliance people. Also, it's helpful when you get to the point where you can be having some back and forth with these with the buyers. It's helpful to be able for you to know kind of like their top concerns and the way that they think about it and the way they prioritize their concerns and needs. And if you can speak to that in language that they understand, that it goes so much farther to helping you build a relationship. They feel seen. They feel like, oh yeah, you understand the thing that I'm struggling with. You understand the compliance that I have to lay down here. You're already so much farther down the road in terms of understanding. So that's why I thought it would be helpful to give you a snapshot of the types of things on buyers and chefs' minds when they are looking at maybe bringing on you as a new vendor or a supplier, or looking at a product that you're bringing forward maybe to sell through maybe one of their distributor channels. So we'll get more into the compliance piece, because that really fits into our focus around operations today. So dropping back in just a little bit of detail. So all buyers care to some degree about these things and are asking these kinds of questions. They might prioritize them differently, at a restaurant versus a grocery store versus a college, but they are asking these kinds of questions. This is a little bit about like the uniqueness of each of these different wholesale buyers. So yes, they care about all of those things. But say when we look at just the retailers or the grocery stores, if you're trying to bring product there, um, they're very concerned about your product readiness, like yes, compliance, food safety, all of those pieces, that you have your proper licenses and certifications. Yes to that. Um, but what could make or break the deal is you not being able to present a ready product for them and understand that they're thinking about shelf life. They're thinking about what it looks like on the shelf, how much shelf space it takes, the packaging. There's so much compliance around packaging. So this consistency and quality, packaging and labeling, and understanding that how they're going to be marking up the product. Sometimes they're like, if you have too high a price point, like you need too much for that product you're trying to bring, it's an easy no for them because their margins are like quite slim. Restaurants, hotels, catering, those sorts of food service folks, yes, they care about all the other things we talked about. Something maybe unique in this market channel is that they can often be more flexible. Say, for example, if you're like really working with a restaurant, um, there could be seasonality to the menu, which matches your own seasonality of the products you've got. Working with chefs, restaurant chefs, it can be a little whimsical, I guess might be a generous way to put it. There could be last minute orders. Also, it can be difficult to get them to order with consistency because of they're managing a lot of pieces all at the same time. And so if they're used to working with multiple vendors, it takes some strategy and like consistency to stay on the top of their stack to make sure that they're continuing to order from you. And so that is something that we've seen come up. These can also be smaller orders. And they may or may not care a lot about the product appearance because they're thinking about how it might look on a finished plate. So this space, like I mentioned, for institutions, there are other rules, there are contracts to navigate. This can be a pretty daunting space, but it can be very rewarding also. Because their budgets are just so big, like $10 million. If we could get universities to direct 10% of that, 5% of that, that's like a meaningful shift. $500,000 is a meaningful shift to reinvest in the local food system and hopefully, in your farm business. So the things that you're navigating in these institutional spaces, there are contracts around maybe the food service, the actual company that's running the kitchen and doing the purchasing. It could be a corporation and they could be, and they would likely, though they have an agreement to, with the university on what food service looks like, they also have their own corporate priorities. So now you're navigating like a buyer who, is serving the student body, but they're also kind of like they're serving their own businesses, their parent companies, priorities in terms of purchasing. The margins could be smaller for you, but the volume could be a lot bigger. So if you're thinking about this market, like going through into public institutions like a university, like what are the kinds of products that you could get a high enough dollar amount and produce at a scale that the institution is going to need. Maybe that means that you buddy up with another person who's doing broccoli so y'all can like fulfill that scale of orders. There are different ways that you could start to strategize being able to scale into that market. So again, we'll spend some time on that soon. Food manufacturers, these are those processors that likely have their own brands that they're creating. And so your product would need to have some consistency, like moisture content in size can be important in food selling to food manufacturers. There's often like really unique contracted language. That is like, there could be some exclusivity. There could be uh, some forward contracting possible. So that is a benefit to working with processors who want to take your product and turn it into their own and sell it out to their customers. Um, but making sure you have enough like traceability systems and enough liability coverage to sell into that channel um, could be a challenge. Last but not least, um, working with other wholesalers, distributors, or folks who are like redistributing the product, and co-ops and food hubs. Um, Reliability and relationship, like being in good communication, are like key and essential to working in these channels. You could jump on maybe you can become a new supplier to a local distributor who's already serving like large institutional markets. So figuring out whether or not you have some products that help them round out their product catalog is kind of a good place to start and point to have the conversation with folks at that space. Um, the catalogs, getting to know how they sell your food is important. Like they often have some kind of online storefront or a product catalog, and there's going to be a profile of the products that you've got. And so they need that to be really standardized when they're serving their bigger customers.
And Amanda, Hannah in the chat had a comment and question. I'm most familiar with connecting with Restaurant Market, but what are some of the ways to network with institutions and food manufacturers?
That's a great question. I would say keep attending things like this. There are times when folks like those distributors I was just talking, like maybe local or regional distributors who are already working with institutions or selling to food manufacturers, maybe they're attending. Like just the general networking can really pay off, even though it can be also tedious. Um, I would say so that's a great point of entry, looking for regional distributors that carry product that would be similar to yours in your area. Um, and because I'm not too familiar with Central Florida. Another way is to just like maybe reach out. Maybe they're to I can speak for higher ed. If other folks have shares, I would love to hear thoughts. Um, But for higher ed, doing some research to figure out if the college or university in your area has a local purchasing goal or initiative. If you find out that these institutions do have some kind of like mandate or stated goal around local purchasing, that can oftentimes be an inroad to reaching out to maybe dining. We just do research. Like sometimes when we're working with a university or when we're scoping, if we're going to be able to work with a university, like we're just starting to do a ton of research. Like, is the kitchen in food service self-operated? Like, does that university run its own kitchen or is that contracted out to a third party, for example? Um, Food manufacturers are a little more tricky, and I don't have tips and tricks on that. It's just like in my networks over time, I've met folks who are doing that, and then they become the people that you can pull on. If anybody else has some insights on connecting with food manufacturers, please share. Cool. So I'm curious also, like, thank you so much, Hannah, for sharing, because like I am curious, like what have y'all's experiences been, or what are the big hangups or ways that you have found to more successfully navigate sales with any of these types of wholesale buyers? please drop it in the chat.
Would it be okay if I shared a little experience just for 30 seconds? Okay.
Please.
So yeah, my previous job was at Local Foods, which has been since then purchased by Common Market. So I think that finding the so basically my job was sourcing from smaller local farms and getting them into it was a lot of restaurants, but also some institutions and just having that on their availability list. So I would say, finding it's hard to find like-minded distributors and looking at the food networks that way because it is really hard to yourself be selling directly to an institution. But there are some like regional distributors. I don't know the full, lay of the land on that, but like if you look up Common Market, for example, they're a wonderful distributor who works with a lot of like smaller sized farms to get them to consolidate things and move them into institutional settings. I think the other thing I would recommend would be um, trying to look at like any like local grants and local because a lot of times since the food that you're going to be supplying would be more expensive, there needs to be some sort of like incentive fund, like things that are there are different kinds of grants in different locations. Usually it's like a statewide thing, like a farm to school thing, or LFPA was a big uh thing that helped move some smaller farms to be able to work with some institutions. So that's just a little bit of advice from my background here.
That's awesome. Thanks for mentioning, especially that about grants too, Sean. It's exciting to hear about, when it works and how long it takes to just like be in the network, be building connections until you find those mission aligned and values aligned um, value chain co-conspirators. So, so what do we do? So given ding, 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 I'm gonna flip back to this. So these are the things that wholesale buyers are thinking about, things that they're concerned about. These are boxes that they need to check off in order to bring you into their um purchasing guide. So how do we one determine if that's where we want to go? Oh, this is a good question, Carla. How do we determine that that's where we want to go and that that's like moving into that market channel, wholesale channel is a thing that makes sense for us? And then how do we just kind of like test that out? And so we'll take some time to work through a tool to help us all um, be able to like map it out, be like, oh yeah, how good am I in this area? How strong am I in this? How strong do I understand like um how quickly I could grow the products that we're offering, for example. So these questions here, so instead of flipping it in that these are what the buyers are asking themselves, these are questions that we can be asking ourselves. So first, to meet scale and consistency, can I reliably be growing or making enough of this product to meet the demand or the scale of the orders that could be coming? So much smaller for restaurants, much larger for institutions, for example. Um, do you know, or do you have a pathway to um or some support in figuring out how to size and package your products for that market channel? Um, do you have the necessary licenses, insurance, food safety in place for the buyer? So let's use this tool to ask ourselves these questions so we can be doing this self-assessment. Carla, I love this question. Maybe we can let's lift it right now before we jump into the tool. Otherwise, it's not going to fit um, in the flow probably as easily. So Carla's question in the chat, what are people seeing with grant availability in today's environment? So I would love to hear folks, if folks are having stories to tell around that. I can say that as a nonprofit that supports this work, it's been super difficult. We hadn't relied on government grants in the past because we had like really appealed to the philanthropic sector, so more like private foundations. But since all the public, like the federal funds have been cut, there's just like a lot more pressure and demand on private foundation funds to support folks like Real Food Challenge who are value chain navigators and co-conspirators with y'all to get you into these like secure wholesale markets. So I can say that's what it looks like from my nonprofit perspective. And that some states have figured out how to reprioritize their state budgets to catch some of the things that have been lost by, for example, LFPA going away.
Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, Hannah. Been seeing a small number of agriculture impact investment funds popping up from food entrepreneurship perspective. That's awesome. Cool. So let's move into an activity so y'all don't just have to hear me talking at you and sharing a single perspective. Let's get into this activity. So this self-assessment activity we'll take in a couple different pieces. So let me make sure that I can. Ding, ding. Cool. So in a sec, we'll drop a link to this document. I just wanted to give give some direction and orient everyone before we jumped into using it. This was my attempt at creating a simple version of a readiness tool. But once you get started, it's hard to pull back and not jump into the weeds. So please, I offer this lightly as a single tool to use to help you think about your own operations and how they might be able to stand up when scaling into a wholesale market. Zoom in a touch here. So this is very generalized for a wholesale buyer, kind of like based on, thanks KP, based on all of the like buyer needs and concerns that we went over. So we've got it, there are many categories, right, of our operations that we should be thinking about when we're assessing if we're ready to move into a certain market. This might apply especially if we know that currently we don't have like the infrastructure or maybe experience around maybe bookkeeping, or maybe it's logistics. So let's go through these categories really quick. So production capacity. So this worksheet is going to ask you to rate yourself 1 to 5. Here's the rating. So not started, emerging, developing, near ready, and then ready for a wholesale scale up. So you're going to rate yourselves, your own operations, 1 through 5 in all of these areas. So production capacity. So what's your current yield and potential for expansion, right? So this implies that you already have a strong sense in your operations, in your ability to produce. So in the area of infrastructure and equipment, do you think your wash and pack shed is going to be adequate for really growing sales? Is your cold storage going to be adequate? If you had to do your own transportation and move a pallet of broccoli, would you be able to do that? Or are you connected with somebody and already have an arrangement or an agreement with you, sharing equipment with somebody else to move that much product? This area around food safety and compliance. Are you already compliant with buyer requirements? So if we thought about like institutions, typically like FSMA or GAP, depending on what your products look like, that could be a lot more complicated or that could be a little bit easier. Again, this tool is very generalized. Another area that I'd like y'all to think about, this is me, all of this input is just me giving you an example of what this could look like. Financial readiness, how well do you understand your cost of production and your cash flow? And do you think that you could, so say the payment terms are like 45 days for a really large order. Do you have enough cash flow to support you in that middle time before you're paid by the institution or the distributor or whomever you're selling to? Labor and management, do you think your team is ready to grow or strong enough to have an increased harvest or production? These are kind of optional. These like market relationships. Do you already have like buyers in your this is me being old, in your Rolodex? Do you already have like a little list or some ideas of places you could go? Your branding and storytelling, those pieces may be less important, kind of like at this assessment phase. But logistics and distribution, are your delivery systems efficient and scalable? And so data and tracking, are you tracking your yields, your inventory, that gets to kind of traceability and being food safety certified, but also your invoices. Are you able to like, what does your bookkeeping look like? Does it feel pretty efficient and like it's ready to grow? Okay. KP did a great job dropping in the chat. You could either click a downloaded copy of this tool, or you could click a link and it'll take you, if you're already like logged into your Google account, it'll take you to this page where you can view only, and then you're going to need to make your own copy so you can work in this yourself. So then you'd go here under file, make copy. It'll ask you where it goes. You'll have the name, make the copy. And now you've got your own version that you can make your own.